seen K's used. I mean, the mineral doesn't even have the. Well, there's like MIKA, MICHA. This cable's really wet today because I just did a study involving vol. Well, I can probably flip it over.
Well,
We were doing.
I only put my blinders. Ew, that's fine.
We were doing a volume investigation.
That's always fun.
They try to turn the volume up.
No, they pour
I know, right?
But these are
I tried. Be mad at me for trying.
yes. Okay, you will try to get
Yeah.
that and you
I might be progressing, but at least I'm progressing. All right, yeah.
My name is most commonly spelled wrong. Everyone thinks there's an N-A. No one. Yes, I'm not kidding. What if we did N-A? I spelled it
So,
yeah.
I hope this will never actually matter for you because you have to put yourself in a bad situation first. But if I asked you to say the alphabet backwards,
I wouldn't be able to do it.
which is a common task that police officers use to check your sobriety, which means are you sober, able to drive, operate a motor vehicle, or should you not be, and should you either be walking your happy butt home or get a ride with somebody else.
So
Now,
we can't do it and we're sober.
they're not actually looking for you to do the opposite backwards. They're looking to see how you respond to trying to think through something backwards, and if you like fall over while you're trying to think about it. So this would be considered, and guys, again, this I talked to you like a very mature 8th grade class. This would be considered the inverse of the alphabet. Now, never should you respond to a police officer, no sir, I do not know the inverse of the alphabet, but can you inverse this function? But that's what we're going to do today.
If you
So,
were to do that, they'd be like, alright, he's not drunk. He's not drunk, he's just he's not drunk, he's just incredibly English. He's not drunk, he doesn't
Chris
want
starts
to
talking about the probability of making Raiders of the Lost Ark with random pixels, and the cop's like, nope, you're coming with me.
You're not
So,
drunk, you just watch Rick and
when
Morty.
you first learned about functions, sorry, I wanted to get us laughing to start class. When we first learned about functions,
They were weird.
you probably were told something about like the function machine, right? Which I'm less cheesy. Well, okay, maybe that's not true, but I don't like the elementary way of describing things. But a function is something that operates on an input and gives you an output, right? So we could really visualize this by the function f of x can have an input dropped into it, process through the input, and give you an output. Now the inverse of this function would be the opposite. We drop in the resulting value, a function processes, and it spits out the original. Now,
processing function
it depends.
All of time.
I'm just thinking that. It just
So, the notation of this, reload the page, I don't know, man, or get a textbook.
Whoa.
The notation of this, and I can't write on this screen, so I gotta flip my screens now, is what we use for any really inverse notation that we want to use. Just like we could write inverse sine, inverse cosine, inverse tangent. We can do the same thing here. So f to the -1 of x is the inverse function to f of x. Now, this is actually really easy. And I forget how I got taught this, but I don't know why I didn't realize how easy this was from the get-go. If you are told that the steps in this function take the input, so this function, right, our origin, takes the input value, multiplies it by 5, subtracts 8, and then divides by 2. What can I do for you?
Nah, I was just looking at it.
Let's do the inverses and the opposites. order, like multiply by 2, add 8, and then
Divide by 5x.
So if we plug 3 in, this lesson's going to go very fast. 5 times 3, 15 minus 8. Wait a minute.
Do you suffer from this?
15 minus 8 is still
I think we have to do it differently.
Wait.
We have to surround the 3 minus 8 is not 7.
Oh wait, this is g of x.
it's not that same.
This is an f. This is g of. Oh dang it. So this is g of x.
13 and 3.
No, I'm talking about 126. I was just being a goof trying to see if anyone would point out that we're actually operating with g of x now.
Well, I was gonna do that, but that was kind of rude.
No, it's not. I'm trying to see if you guys are on your toes. So here's our definition for an inverse function, right? We use f of -1. Like f to the -1 of x. But so this is a new function, right? So we just said 15 minus 8, 7.
which apparently no one believes.
I thought he was asking 3 minus 8. I'm like,
And then divide by 2. 3.5. Now Jacob was saying, wait, if we want to undo that, if we want to grab this and go back through the process,
inverse function.
just do everything in the reverse order, right? So Jacob's hypothesizing the inverse. Hello, smartboard.
Oof.
2x plus 8 over
Maybe it's like a Nintendo. You guys don't even know.
I know.
The days of blowing out a cartridge and hoping it would work when you put it back in. Or then if it wouldn't work, you'd have to get out the cleaner kit and like drip the little things on the giant Q-tip and
I don't know
wipe
that
the.
part.
Yeah, because you didn't ever use an NES.
Yeah, but
I used
different
one.
type of cartridge.
Bro,
Like,
that's
Use one.
really weird
It's
style,
so
like,
weird. Like, the little
thing.
thumbsticks were like,
All right, Jacob. Tell me what you think this inverse function would be then.
what was it? 2x plus 8 over 5.
Try it out.
so
So you put 3.5
7
in
plus
for
6 plus 8.
That works.
14.
It works.
Now, this is how it was taught to me, right? Inverse everything that's been done, go in the opposite order. If we list out the order, we go back up. Way easier than that. Now, Jacob may already be realizing this, and all of you may already be realizing this, but you're smarter than I was at your age. What I'm not joking. What we're really doing here, write this down again, but instead of saying f of x, write down y.
That's way better. Oh, let me do it.
Instead of talking about inverse functions, how we really should be teaching this to you guys is the input and the output trade places. So instead of isolating the output, isolate the input. So to find the inverse of this function, just get x by itself. So, exactly what Jacob told us to do. We would first multiply by 2 on both sides, right? Processing through the algebra. That gives us 2y equals 5x minus 8. We would then add 8 on both sides. And then, after that, divide by 5. So we're going to end up with y equaling, well, we already know this, 2y, or sorry, not y, x would equal 2y plus 8 divided by 5, exactly what Jacob just told us to do.
Did 4 pages have to be dedicated to this?
Probably not. So where this got confusing in my head is my teachers never really used x and y. Once we went into function notation, like function notation, and I never really realized f to the -1 x is your output. Or sorry, is your input. F of x is your output, right? F of x is y. We just decided to change notations to be fancier. So, sorry, that's a y. I know
Why
sometimes
are we using like
So, f of negative is x, which is like weird when this is involved in there. All you have to do is isolate the input. Yeah.
Why do we use function notation?
To express things that are happening out in the real world. Like, so, okay, real world example. If you really want to know, Satya, you asked the question, remember, not me.
It was all for a fun.
If you really,
He doesn't care.
no, I get that, but if you really want to know,
Steven.
I was trying to blow past that, but if you really want to know, my brother used to work for a company called Edison Welding Institute.
Oh, never mind.
EWI. It's a local Columbus company, and they were doing research on frictions of metals to be used with planes. Now, thanks to that research, data collected, functions, like computer, everything else that went into all that, every plane has titanium on the nose and on the edges of the wings, because the amount of air friction saved to cutting the air with titanium as opposed to any other metal that they were previously using not only makes up for the cost of having to buy titanium, because it's expensive, but it also saves them fuel, like a substantial fuel. So thanks to some research and some functions, we've now changed air travel forever.
What I'm asking is, why couldn't they just use Y?
You're not funny. So the real reason, we already used Y. The original function used Y. So if we use Y, our inverse function is actually x equals. Remember, because what's the inverse? I switched these screens. What's the inverse of x squared? Square root x. Right, and that, if y equals x squared, x equals square root of y. They are inverse functions of each other. So you could use xy, but then you're making x equals.
Okay, I just learned something from that.
So then, if you use x equals and change that into f negative 1 of x, it makes more sense because we always input x, right? This is why we don't stick with x and y. We always input x.
Wait, are they going to change with x?
No, so this is the problem. This is why we stop using x and y. So here, on your paper, write down n of x equals 4x minus 12, or you could write down y equals 4x minus 12, but I can't write on that screen, so we're putting that up there. The input of that function is x, right? And the result is n of x. If we write this as y equals 4x minus 12, when I go to isolate, I end up with x equals y plus 12 divided by 4, but now my input is a y value.
So it's just,
We don't like that because according to us, functions input an x value because the x is the independent variable.
So we just,
Hang on, can I one more sentence? So instead, we rewrite this as f of negative 1 of x, and now we swap and we say x plus 12 over 4.
okay.
So we are using x and y, but then we just change what we wrote.
That makes more sense.
And this is what nobody connected for me. I seriously struggled with inverse functions. Seriously struggled.
All of this for a pun? Was it worth it?
I think it was. I think he understands it more now.
Well, I understood it because I just did that, like.
But if you understand it better now.
But this lesson could be summed up: make x alone.
At what kind?
It could more efficiently be summed up with isolate x.
That sounds.
What about
That's-
Well, it's the same amount of
That
syllables,
sounds
but only 2 words. So we gotta give.
Or could we just say extract?
Stop.
Now it's 1 word.
Alright, so do j of x. Find the inverse of j of x. Find the inverse of j of x. And the sad thing is no one ever watches these videos to appreciate those terrible, terrible jokes.
Hey, if I'm sick, I'll watch them. You have more views than me.
If something dumb
Yeah, but I'm
happens, I'll
older
write
than
down
you.
the date and I'll watch it later.
I mean, that's not necessarily like.
A definitive, like, yeah, I know. Like, older doesn't mean you'd have more views.
Wait, do you just completely ignore PEMDAS and do it backwards?
No, to you saying do we completely ignore PEMDAS? we're following PEMDAS, but in the reverse order of if we have to isolate.
So it just like multiply 10,
Yeah.
add 7.
Like we go up the PEMDAS ladder in a way. Now it's kind of convoluted because we don't. When we have a problem like this, we don't even exactly follow PEMDAS unless you write these parentheses. Right, because we have to do the subtraction before the multiplication, which is not following PEMDAS, quote unquote. But if we put the parentheses in, then we're doing parentheses
So it's
before the
sad,
division.
sad mess.
Don't try to formalize it. It all depends on the problem you're looking at. It really does depend on the problem you're looking at. So here, the first thing we would inverse division by 10 because it would be the last thing to happen. So we get 10 times what will be the new input, which really we could write as y if you were using the x and the y. Then, yeah, plus, oh, there's no, okay, well, I didn't need to make that numerator, but there we go.
Put it over 1.
That was necessary.
Multiply it by 1.
All right,
Or you could
so
That was necessary.
this is where we have the opportunity for my biggest aha moment since I've been a teacher. Anessa is going to Japan, kind of jealous, and she's going to stay with her friend, and Chieko tells her, or however you say that, I seriously just don't know, like Chieko, tells her while you're visiting, the temperature will be as high as 30 degrees, and Anessa's like, whoa, buddy,
That's
Hi.
Actually. Yeah.
Now, what we got to realize is 30 degrees Celsius is quite different than 30 degrees Fahrenheit. So if we know that our freezing points are 0 and 32, right, because we're Americans and we're dumb, and our boiling points are 100 or 212 because we're Americans and we're dumb, how do we write a linear function C that will help us convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit? Now, I know some of you might know this already, but honestly, could we use this knowledge base and derive a function for that conversion? So like C with an input F, or can we do F with an input C? Like, so talk with each other. See if you can
First off,
derive it.
we know that it has to be plus something plus 32 because 0 of an input of 0 gets you 32 out. So it's something plus 32. And then I imagine we could use this for the 100. I don't think decimals can do that. Equals 212 plus 32 or something. So you subtract 32. I don't know if this works. Guess and check.
Or you could just like actually not guess and check and just do 212 minus 32 and then divide it by 100.
Yeah.
Get 1.8.
Oh, you're like doing an inverse to find out. X plus 32. So these things are useful.
A little bit. Just
Oh, a little bit.
just a tad.
280? Mr. Hudson, can I tell you a fun fact about Fahrenheit?
I'm sure you're going to.
Okay. C equals 2. Fine, then I'm not going.
I figured even if I said no, you'd be like, what? And just like tell me anyways.
No,
Sure, you can tell
I'm
me.
gonna keep my secret now.
Okay, fine.
Okay, but like, now you're actually gonna tell me. Fahrenheit was made so like if it was at 100 degrees, it'd be like 100% hot. So at 0 degrees, but like 0% hot.
In Celsius?
No, Fahrenheit. So how hot it feels. Like that's Fahrenheit. A good way to think about it is about like the percentage of heat it feels like. Yeah. So like 20% hot. That's really cool. But like 90, that's 80% warm.
Did you just make up this fun fact?
No, I saw it on r/bank memes.
Wait, what was your
So it's made up.
No, it's not real.
Don't trust the internet.
I know.
Especially Reddit. Especially dank memes.
This is on video.
I'm just saying it seems really.
Now, that said, sure, Except we go negative.
Yeah,
Temperatures go negative a lot,
When
actually.
you go negative, that just means that you're like.
And depending on where you're at, temperatures can go up to like 120, 130, so
And
that
that's
isn't
pretty hot.
really a good measure.
What did you?
No,
what
but it
did-
makes
what was your
sense.
fun fact?
And then
It's
Celsius
not
makes more
warm.
sense because 0% of heat is frozen. 100% of heat is boiling, changing states.
Yes, it does
Not
make more sense.
necessarily.
But
No.
Can
What
we
about
move
the
on?
sun?
You
The
know,
sun is
feeling.
27
Celsius
million.
makes sense if you're talking
Fahrenheit is
water.
We're all gonna talk at the same time.
Yes.
Fahrenheit is pretty stupid.
If you're talking
If you're
Mine is.
Celsius only, when it comes to the
So
United
we're trying to
States,
figure out-
That's a good way to like think about.
Levi's got that look of like, man, if we could just get done with this, we could do our homework.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh.
So much 32 divided by 2.8.
I don't know.
It's not
But
like Levi could
if-
finish his homework in 15 minutes anyway.
If
Yeah, I can. From my homework. You better not.
we tried to make this linear. Now I don't know if we're gonna do C equals and F equals, but Chris told me to do plus 32, so I decided to put F because I think the Fahrenheit needs the plus 32 since 0 Celsius
Yep.
gets 32. So I think we got F equals. And then if we're making it linear, we're kind of like, okay, Y and sort of X, so like Celsius is kind of my input here. And then if we think about our coefficient being our slope, kind of like in a way, then that's like rise over run. What do we really use for that? If Fahrenheit's like our Y, then this is like our Fahrenheit, probably, over our Celsius.
But
Maybe.
minus 32 Fahrenheit minus
So what is our Fahrenheit value then?
212, and then minus 32 is 180, and then you divide it by
It's not
100.
208. That was stupid of me. It's 1.8.
Where'd
Yeah,
you get
that's
two?
also what I said.
Wait, so why was your-
earlier,
I don't know,
a
but
long
that was
time ago.
foolish. Also, I'm aware.
Foolish mortals.
No,
I've seen that equation before.
No, I subtracted it and then I divided by 100. It was
Now.
It's wrong.
Try it. Plug in 30. Now we don't actually know. We could use Google and figure out what the real conversion is. But if we plug in 30,
Well, that is the real conversion, and I did use it.
so we're sure about this.
Yeah, that's
Now,
just
this is where people screw up. The change in the Fahrenheit temp, because we went from 32 to 212. So the change, right? So delta F, delta C. I just didn't count my deltas. What is the C equals formula if we were trying to derive Celsius?
Five
Bitch,
over
talk
nine.
to each other.
No.
That's funny.
It's just the inverse. You get.
You are correct. What is the inverse?
Of
I don't want to do
5 over 9 F minus 32?
No, not quite.
Hold on.
F equals 9C over 5 plus 32.
Is this function the inverse of that function?
No, you need some parentheses in there.
Why?
because you do
Because the
32.
5/9 is distributed between the F and the 32, negative 32.
Do the algebra. And this is why I wanted to do. When we do the algebra, Jacob's 100% right. I'm just trying to go through this slowly so it makes sense. We subtract the 32 first. So we get F minus 32.
That makes sense.
Then we will multiply each side by the inverse of 9/5. So this has to be grouped before we can use 5/9. So our real Celsius formula that a lot of people screw up is 5/9 times the quantity.
Wait, 5/9.
And
Yes,
Inverse, the inverse of 9.
it's the inverse.
Oh yeah. Wait, why did I write 9 5?
reciprocal of 9.
No.
Never mind. I forgot
If we
to change
do the algebra, it makes sense why we have to do that subtraction first. Now, what this really applies to is we could have a direct conversion factor if it wasn't for the difference at our start points,
And I
our
would've
zeros,
gotten away with
right, our 0 and our 32.
If it weren't
That's
for
what
your
screws it up.
thing.
Once we correct that, then we can make a direct conversion using our scale factor. But it depends which way we're actually going, the order in which we correct the 32. Questions? That's not enough read time. So on an assessment, be ready for some temperature work that might try to walk you towards a trap door. Think it through.
Hold down.
Okay, because they will sometimes give you like, here's the formula for Fahrenheit. If you're given the temperature in Fahrenheit, what's the Celsius? And they don't give you the C equals formula. Now, of course, you could plug it in and then do the algebra, but you have to carefully do the algebra or derive the new formula if you've got multiple problems. Be able to like derive these formulas while you're doing the test, because that's how it's gonna make things easier for you.
Or remember.
Nah, don't try to memorize stuff.
They could have something like gravity equals -16. Where it like isn't actually right.
Close.
Parenthesis. Actually.
C equals 5 over 9, open parentheses, S minus 10. That's really fun.
Mr. Hudson,
Yes.
in the state of Pennsylvania, drivers may see $2 added to their speeding ticket for every mile per hour by which they break the speed limit. Therefore, if you drove a car over a Philadelphia speed bump at 90% the speed of light, in addition to destroying the city, you could expect a speeding ticket of $1.14 billion.
Wonderful, but that's just a bunch of random math.
Well, what if Elon Musk made a car?
That is what if. And
So
he had
what
the
if
knowledge. Someone asked that question, and so he answered that question.
So are we doing homework now or still working on this?
We have zero.
Oh, we're still working on this, but Chris just got me off task.
Please close the
No.
book and put it under your desk.
Not doing homework yet.
Well, that's really a debate. So, be careful. The trap that most of you will want to follow if you're trying to do your work fast is you will say the inverse function of h of x is 1/2 x plus 1. It's not. Okay, so that's why we look at the Fahrenheit Celsius conversion. This would be 1/2 the quantity of x plus 1. And that has to be done first before the 1/2 applies. So we don't have to do more of these if we don't want, also because we've already talked about the quadratic function inverse, square root compared to squaring. And so let's just do these real quick to make sure we're comfortable with a couple that aren't linear. I can't write on here anyways, but for inverse p of x, what would we get?
Square root of x minus 2.
Is that square root of quantity x minus 2 or square root of x then minus 2?
No,
Square root of x minus 2.
So you're going to say these things, and I want us to get comfortable saying this now. A parentheses is said quantity, right? So we would say square root quantity of x minus 2. In q of x, I would really, well, it depends on how you want to process. If you distribute out, then you'll isolate one way. If you don't distribute out, you'll isolate a different way. You should get the same answer either way. So for inverse of q of x, yeah, x divided by 2, then plus 3. Right? Not quantity. We have x divided by 2, then plus 3. Questions?
Yeah. Homework and pick 6.
Yes, homework is a pick 6. I would encourage you to do inverse functions for your pick 6. So like do 132. What? What? 4-1. 9-4-1.
One to get one out when I got.
Sorry, I was confused with what you were asking. Oh, disc golf club today for anyone that wants to come. It'll be announced at some point.
I have Dennis. Wait, what?
That sounds zero fun.
Hey, I probably don't have any cabinets.
What?
I had one cabinet and I was on the
Extensions. 4 out in the field. I need a few minutes to get the goals out there and everything. What?